Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar by Phrase, where we will talk about how to bid farewell to APIs with a cutting-edge workflow customization solution. My name is Clara, and I'm happy to welcome you all here to this session. Now, let's see what we have on the agenda for today. So we are currently doing the welcoming remarks. Next, I will introduce the speakers for today. We will then introduce the Phrase Orchestrator and talk about the ways how Phrase Orchestrator helps automate, what it automates and why you should automate. And then we will have a look at the infrastructure and developer involvement topic. And we will have time for some Q&A at the end. So our speakers today are our expert solution architects, Tobias Scherf, who is the Director of Solutions at Phrase, and Miklós Urbán, who is also our expert solution architect. So they will walk you through our today's topic and show you an in-product demo as well. So let's get started with the topic, Introduction to the Phrase Orchestrator. So what challenges are we addressing with Phrase Orchestrator? Large-scale organizations face the challenge of scaling their localization processes that are often complex and need tailoring to specific needs. And to do that, they would usually need to either engage developers to build middleware in-house, which can be time-consuming and resource-heavy, or they would outsource the solution with a third party, which tends to be a lengthy process and comes with significant costs. But with Phrase Orchestrator, which is a no-code workflow automation solution for the Phrase suite, we can give you the option to build your own customized workflows according to your business logic. So with that said, we can start with the first topic, automation, and I will pass it to Tobias.
Thank you, Clara. So yes, thank you for the introduction of the topic, of course, and one thing that we thought of in introducing Orchestrator, of course, is how to further move towards an automated workflow, right? That are automations in general, and how to improve ultimately the landscape of where we are today, which where we were ultimately before Orchestrator, which was any customization would require some level of custom code, and so this leads me into the business values as well as to why automate and what to automate. For first part, the why, it's ultimately, maybe you're facing volume increases in your operation and it's difficult to manage. And so you're having scaling issues, right? You're wanting to maybe look at prevention of errors. So there may be manual tasks you're carrying out at the moment because you can't automate or you can't afford to automate, maybe write custom API code or something like that to automate things. You want to increase your productivity, ultimately do more work, right, and more quickly maybe, shorten time to market. So again, going towards this fast turnaround time, essentially avoiding manual tasks that would take a lot of time and then get to a point where you can get to market with maybe multiple language releases much more quickly by avoiding all the manual work that may be in your process today. Ensure consistent results because of automation. A lot of things can be very consistent, of course. So rather than having human beings do things differently every single time or between different resources in the team, people may not be doing things exactly the same. You can avoid that through automation. And overall cost reduction, of course, always looking at how can we do things more cheaply and maybe increase our margins in the work or essentially reduce the costs either way. What to automate, right? So give you some ideas of what to automate and things we've seen organizations do. Data exchange, of course, between systems is always something that you want to automate. So never handing off data between systems manually. Conditional content routing. So when certain events occur in your process, you want to maybe do something that is very unique depending on the event type or the condition, right? This might be something that you're doing manually today where, in a certain situation, like if I see errors in the content, then I route the content or I assign it to somebody. This could be automated. Quality checks in content routing. So again, like quality checks and looking at, do I have, for instance, terminology issues? Do I have other types of errors like tagging errors or something in my content that when I deliver it, I know is going to cause or downstream problems, upstream problems, however you want, and ultimately want to avoid them, but also want to automate that process somewhat, right? Because it's very maybe manual and I have to check everything, even files or content that doesn't have any quality issues. Financials-based content routing. So I want to maybe go to the cheapest option in some cases, maybe not always the most expensive, but that's a manual task because I have to find out, okay, who is the cheapest or what is my cheapest option? Language adaptations and preparation. So a lot of organizations these days also focus on how can we reuse content adapted to different markets, right? Translate maybe a base language once in a certain locale, and then adapt that content for other regions. So this could be for Spanish, for instance, for different regions in Latin America, where we can adapt the content for Argentina, Colombia, or so on. Synchronization of configurations. So sometimes when you have a lot of configurations going on in the platform that have similarity, so there's like components that are the same across your configurations. If you make a change to that, currently you would go through multiple of these configurations, let's say project templates, and you would then make those changes everywhere. With automations, you could synchronize these changes across and automate the step and then actually save a lot of time. And then, of course, anytime there's repetitive tasks that follow a pattern. So if there's a decision-making logic, like if this, then that, you can employ typically automation and make it happen. So automation options that currently exist. So there are a number of ways inside of Phrase that you can automate your workflows, you automate your work. Automation can be configured often in as little as 5 minutes. So within 5 minutes, you can already achieve automation that can help you streamline your work. Some of you may already be using that, some may not. And usually this automation can be configured by users who are not deeply technical. That means you don't have to be an engineer to do that, right? A lot of the features we've developed in the past and we're developing today are really aimed at simplicity as much as we can to make it easy for people to use automations and be effective in their work. One of those, of course, submitter portals. Many probably have used them. They can be used also with third-party integrations, so you can automate that content handoff, right, as one example. Automated project creation, another one, so fully automated process. Again, using with third-party integrations, you can exchange handoffs between a third-party system, Phrase, and back, right? Those are well known already for many of you, probably. Some haven't maybe used them or even explored them. Workflow automations providing workflow step skipping. So that's one that we've implemented a while ago. But basically the idea is that if you don't have somebody assigned in a certain workflow step, then it gets just auto skipped, right? Rather than having to have a project manager sit there and then move the process along, it can be automatically handled. So that was one minor automation task that we implemented a while back. But it was helpful because sometimes not every language goes through the same steps, right? And some languages maybe are treated differently. The other one, of course, is REST APIs. So if you have a team of developers that can help you automate and customize your operation, you could use the API. And of course, as you know, with that comes a lot of work, comes a lot of cost. So we get to, finally, Orchestrator. And Orchestrator's basically opening up endless opportunities, if you will, as we currently develop the product, and we're going to continue to develop the product and enhance it and mature it. The possibilities of automation really are then opened to non-technical users. So you don't have to be necessarily a developer, nor do you have to be an expert in development to get a really reasonably good, powerful automation up and running in a really short time.
Perfect, thank you. So Orchestrator is the no-code workflow builder to drive automation. That's what we already heard. Demoing automation is always fun, I love it. because it's a demo where you click a button and something unexpected happens out of the blue. On the other hand, when you try to explain what happens, you need to submerge into the technical details that may be daunting to many of you. So in this first part, I will just demo the automation. I will literally click the button and we will see what happened. Later in the webinar, I will actually show the technical details that run in the background to achieve the demonstrated automated processes. But I promise I will try to be as well, keep the ugly pieces for myself, let's put it that way. We will be using Phrase TMS, and I will show you 2 use cases. One of them will be a simple one to understand the basics of this new automation platform. The second one will be a slightly more complex one to give you a sneak peek into the power of Orchestrator. So the first problem we would like to solve is to create an environment-dependent workflow in a new project, kind of a conditional content routing that Toby mentioned. In Phrase TMS projects, the workflow consists of workflow steps that are usually fully set when the project is created. When using project templates, workflow is a fixed setting in the template. Although you can manually change that, you may want to be more flexible with routing the content through the best fit workflow automatically. Let it be a human translation or an empty followed by post-editing kind of workflow. We want to work this around with an automation that looks at the project and creates a workflow that matches the settings. I said environment-dependent routing. By this, I mean things you can find in the project, right? Like metadata, languages, or domain, or things like that, or the output of certain features like analysis reports, automated quality checks, and so on. So in our case, and let me move on and start this little recording of this workflow. Let's assume that our company translates content that either belong to the IT or the automotive domain. And based on our linguistic quality strategy and our wonderful experience, IT content is translated via machine translation plus post-editing workflow. While we experience that automotive content doesn't work so well with MT, so we use a more traditional human translation and review process. We could, of course, set up 2 different project templates, one for each domain, but if you have multiple factors that differentiate the workflow, it may become quite crazy with the number of project templates that you need to set up. I've seen actually hundreds of project templates set for a single localization program just to have the differentiation required for that one. Okay, so let's go into it. There are 2 projects that are being created. One is for the domain called IT, and it's very important to see that the workflow steps are all unchecked. There's no workflow created with this project. So that's project number 1 for IT. And there is another project created similarly, but in this case, the domain will be automotive. And again, it's just important to see that the workflow steps are all unchecked. So we are creating a project, well, actually 2 projects without any workflow. You can actually see that, just to stop for a second. If we had any workflows, we had a drop down just right here beside the jobs label that shows the workflow steps. We don't have anything like that here. So when the project was created, Orchestrator started to work in the background. It checks the domain, and if we refresh the screen, that's what you see. The workflow is created. And in this case, because this is the IT, we said for IT, we want machine translation and post-editing workflow. That's what Orchestrator created. And for the other project, if we go for the automotive project, and refresh the screen, we see that the translation and linguistic review, that's kind of the human translation workflow, is created. So that's exactly what Orchestrator can do. Look into the data that it can receive from the TMS and run the workflow in the background and achieve what we want to achieve. Okay, let's have a sneak peek into the Orchestrator itself. And I promise we will go a bit more deeper into this, but for now, what I just want to show that it is a flow. It starts in the top here and then goes down with the arrows all the way. And it can actually split, it can merge. In this case, it's split. You can see to the IT use case and the automotive use case. And also what you can see is that you're able to document the workflow right on the screen. So if you just check what labels there are, like when a project is created, do a technical step, get an authentication tokens. That's something technical. We don't need to care about it. But If the domain is IT, create MTP workflow. If the domain is automotive, create a translation revision workflow. So you can actually have like a documentation that is understandable to anyone what really this orchestrator process will do. So that's the first use case. And let me move on to the other use case, if it lets me. Okay, I think we are there. So the second use case is slightly more complex. It is built around language adaptation that Toby has already mentioned. So language adaptation is when you translate content into multiple dialects or locals of the same language. For example, French is used differently in France, Switzerland, Canada, or German for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland again. Usually to optimize budget, not all of these locals are translated independently, but the content is translated into the main local, let's say to French France, and then the translation of French France is adapted to the Canadian and the Swiss market. Before it required quite an effort to monitor the status, and when the main language got delivered by the vendor, manually transfer the translation into the other locals and assign the translator. All this now can be automated by Orchestrator, and let me show you how to do that. So so we have this project that contains 6 languages in this case, 3 Germans and 3 French. We choose a main language for both. In this case, I will just choose French France and German Germany. And you can see that down here, the same file is imported to all the 6 languages, and 2 of them for the main languages. These are already completed by the translator. What we want to achieve is once it is reviewed and all completed, the workflow is ended, then use the translation, pre-translate these other 4 files with the content from the main language, and then the adaptation can start. So just to check, let's open up one of the files there. It's the French for the Swiss market, and you can see that the content is empty at the moment, so there's no translation. This is where we expect the translation to appear once we run the orchestrator workflow. So let's go to the revisions tab. For the revisions tab, we can see that the reviser has already completed the job, has not delivered yet. So we are just before delivery. All the segments are already confirmed. So all we need to do is just to simulate that the reviser delivers these 2 jobs. So that's what is happening. I just set it to completed. There we are. And with this, we will trigger the workflow in the background for Orchestrator. And the Orchestrator will check in and transfer the translations to the adapted languages. How it does it is just to show you a little bit of the translation memory management there. We have 2 translation memories set up, the main languages and the adapted languages one. The main languages is actually assigned to each language, but for the main languages, the actual main languages, so for French France, you see, and for the German Germany, that's the only TM, and that's the right TM. That's where we store the translation from the main language translations. For the adapted languages, though, it's like a reference TM. It is not written. It's there just to transfer the segments from the main language to the adapted. So that's how it's set up in the background. And in the meantime, Orchestrator does it work, whatever it needs to do. And let's go back to the translation workflow and refresh it just to see what happened. Okay, there we are. So I tried to keep it simple. So I didn't do assignment. We could actually do assignment as well. But what we did is we run the pre-translation though. And you can see that this is the French for the Swiss market, and that is already pre-translated. We have 101 matches everywhere, and all the segments are waiting for, well, it's unconfirmed, so waiting for adaptation. And that's the same for the French Canadian market. Okay, so now let's move on to some of the more technical aspects, and with that, I give the word back to Toby.
Cool. Thank you, Miklós. This was really cool. I can tell you, if I've had this stuff like years ago, this would have been a thing of dreams. But so much code was written to do just things like this, right, in the past. So nowadays, as you saw with Miklós explaining, it can be easy boxes, visual design on a screen, and magic happens, which is just phenomenal to see. Really excites me every time I get to watch it or work with it even. So yeah, like infrastructure and development involvement, right? So let's kind of dive into that and explore further benefits of why we're really looking at Orchestrator and why Orchestrator is so important. Like one quote that I kind of saw that really kind of resonated was innovation is taking two things that already exist and putting them together in a new way. So this was from Tom Freston at MTV Networks at some point. And I felt like, okay, this is kind of really true. We really are using, you know, workflow methodology together with our APIs, and we're really kind of bringing two things together to make magic happen and make it user attainable, right? Not just for the developer, but for a wider audience. At the same time, Orchestrator will continue to go through developments, and the growth plan is really massive and large, right? It's going to be even more capabilities in the future that we can pack into this, combining different elements, different tool sets, not just our suite, but other products as well, eventually. So this will be quite powerful, and I think builds on top of that concept of combining things and making it user-friendly and attainable to make magic happen, to essentially streamline work and speed it up, right? So with the next slide, we can dive into some of the challenges that exist around customizations, right? So if you think of the challenges that exist, so custom behaviors typically require a lot of custom API integration. So either it's a feature request, but often if it's not a wider user base adoptable process, it's not something that gets a lot of traction, to be honest, right? It's if 1 or 2 users want something versus 1,000, there's a big difference. The features that 1,000 users want usually get integrated. So you're looking at API integration for things that are very unique, very custom. Ongoing maintenance for these kind of custom developments are typically very high, right? So you have your initial development, you have to, of course, maintain this stuff. So as things progress, like let's say the framework that you're developed on continues to evolve, you also need to keep that code base up and running, right? So things will run smoothly and there's no disruption in your processes. There's infrastructure required to run this code, right? So if you're building custom code, integrating against our API, you also need to have an infrastructure to run it in. Typically, that's a virtual environment these days or something alike. That, again, is a cost basis. You know, you may already have virtual space that you can use. That might be okay and will be not much additional cost. Sometimes you have to create that virtual environment, and then it is a cost, right? Code may get rewritten several times. So I've seen this as well. It's like as you have turnover in your development team, new developers come in after some time. They look at what was previously developed. Maybe some issue arises with the code that has to be debugged or fixed. And then people say, oh, this is all broken. I need to refix it. Probably a story you've heard in the past if you've worked with developers. There's preferences. A lot of times people do things differently, and then sometimes developers are not really keen on what was done and they want to rewrite it, right? Maybe even rewrite it in a whole different language set, different code, right? So that they understand it. Let's say going from Python to C# or something, because the developer may not know Python as well as C#. So it makes it easier for him to maintain the code, but then next time you get a new developer, that developer now writes in Python again, or you have to hire specifically for the right skill set, which is also not always easy. So that builds a high dependency on specialized skill sets. So you have a challenge of you need the right people with the right skill set, which can do the work that you need to get done just to keep things running, right? And that can also be troublesome, right? It's not easy always to maintain that skill set, specifically in our industry, where not all of us have the luxury of having developers sitting as part of the team ready to go when you need them. Often it's like even if you have access to developers, it's for some time, there's maybe a allotted budget. And then once your work is done, you lose access to those resources. And then you may need to, again, build new budget or fight for the resources to be back, but you may not get them when you need them. So that's always challenging. You have a lack of support when it is needed most, right? So again, like your situation of the system's down, and in order to operate and deliver, I need to have the system up in yesterday, and your developer is not available. Now what? So that creates a fire drill situation, not something that everybody, of course, is very keen on having. We want things to move very smoothly. Costly and hinders future streamlining and enhancements. Of course, when you operate this way, there's lots of ideas that you could implement. And I think if you've looked even at Orchestrator so far, you've seen what Miklós showed. Again, to quote back at an earlier slide, the possibilities are nearly endless here. So it's a playground for innovation, if you will, of what can be done, what couldn't be done in the past, what was really not feasible, because now you can build with building blocks automations that do a lot of things that you would have carried out manually, or can further streamline your work. APIs kind of limit that factor, because there's always I need the guy that can do it, and I need the money to do it, and I need to have the resource available. So click on the slide and we'll see the other part. The solution, of course, being Orchestrator in our mind, is lowered skill sets required for the customizations. You don't have to be an expert. Like I said, you don't have to be a developer to do this. You can, like Miklós also showed, read the flows, because you can describe them. Somebody builds them, can actually describe them well in human language. So they can be easily followed, and the logic can be followed at what happens where. And so you don't need a very deep skill set or developer to do this stuff. You can actually have lower skill sets or not specific skill sets to do this, right? So a project manager, maybe a localization engineer that's not a developer, but knows how to manipulate files and put them through processes, people like that. Maintenance open to broader set of team members means, if the persons who put the workflow together is not there, is very easily that other team members in the team can maintain that workflow and adjust it if needed, or when the time is needed. Right? We can maintain the infrastructure and security that we do for you, so you don't have to do it, right? We can customize, the customization is clear. There's no need to rewrite code. So somebody isn't gonna come in and say, oh, this workflow is weird, I'm just going to restructure the whole thing. Chances that that's going to happen is very, very remote. It's adding simplicity and reduced requirements on skill sets. You don't have to hire a developer every single time, or maintain one, or maintain budgets. We support you 24/7 on that platform. That means when something goes down, at least from an infrastructure perspective, we can help you, and our support team, as well as our SA team, typically are there to help with workflow challenges. Typically, when something runs, it will run. Otherwise, it's an issue with the platform, then our support team is there 24/7. And you have predictable costs. So you're not, you know what Orchestrator will cost you, and you can plan on additional innovations and additional workflows you want to deploy. There's the added time, right? This is like the time investment it takes to build the workflow, but that's it. And that can, like I said, typically be a lower cost employee probably than a developer. And you don't have to build additional budget just to bring this person in. They're very likely part of your team already. Right? So good. Next slide. And I think this is off to Miklós for the final showcase.
Oh yeah, thank you very much. Now I want to give you a more in-depth look into this playground. Toby explained how it works and some of its features. So let me actually get rid of the presentation and go directly into Orchestrator. Yeah, okay. I just reset the screen and here we are. Hopefully you can see it. Let me just zoom in a little bit. So, Orchestrator is an automation platform. It can be set up to do certain things with your projects, jobs, transition memories, and so on when something happens within the platform. It always needs a starting point, an event, right? We call it the trigger. This could be things like a job is delivered or a project is created. For example, here you are, the workflow we used for the first demo. If you remember, we're creating projects with blank workflow, and Orchestrator created workflows based on the domain field. To achieve this, we need to ask Orchestrator to check the domain and add the workflow steps in the project according to this domain field when the project is created, right? So it needs to know when the project is created. This trigger needs to be listened to, monitored. And that's exactly what happens here in Orchestrator in this process. So we have this trigger on the top, that's the monitor, that's monitoring TMS and looking into it and tries to sense, well, not tries, it senses when the project is created. We also have some rules here. Well, in this case, it's very simple rules. It says it should be, the domain should be automotive or IT. That's what it says in the rules. Okay, there are a number of triggers in Orchestrator. You can have access to them from this little chooser box. You can change the triggers, and I just type project. Yeah, there we are. And here you can already see the project created trigger that is used here. And you can also see that there are some other triggers, some of them for the TMS system, some of them for the phrase strings system. Orchestrator supports both systems, both TMS and strings, where it's their APIs. Okay, so once the trigger is triggered, right, it starts the workflow below. So there are actions down here connected with the flow arrows, and those actions are executed layer by layer. So in this case, as we have seen, there's this technical step, and then there is this workflow creation. How to get access to the actions? Well, in the same chooser window, you can go to actions, and here you can say pre-translate. Let's say, for example, we will need this one for the language adaptation process. So this is actually like the pre-translate job, and if you drag it, you can place it anywhere in your workflow. Like that, and you can get rid of it and so on. So that's the kind of things that you can do. Also, you can see that for these actions, you can set up filters. You can say, go this way only if the domain name is IT, and go this way only if the domain name is automotive. So now I would like to go a little more deep. Please don't get daunted by this. It might look a little bit scary here and there. Anyway, you build an orchestrated workflow by setting up actions that are interconnected. And one action may use the output of a previous action. So for example, when we are setting Orchestrator to create a workflow in the project that has just been created for this action, we need to specify which project it is. We have to provide a so-called project UID. I told you Orchestrator monitors the system, right? So when there is a project created, the UID of this project is captured by this trigger. So this little yellow trigger box on the top will have an output that contains the project UID. It knows it. And we can refer back to this value in the next steps. And that's why I want to show quickly, and please don't leave it if it's ugly. We know it's kind of, well, lacks user friendliness at the moment, but we are working on it. We have plans to add some nicer UI and make it more user friendly. But basically what happens here is I just clicked on this little action to create the MTP workflow. And if I go to parameters, you can see that there are fields that are filled in, and there is a project UID field. That's what I mentioned. This is the thing that we need to fill in. We need to use from a previous action. Well, in this case, the trigger. So if I go edit parameters, what you can see, there's this project UID field. It is filled with this ugly notation. And there is this link button that I click. It shows that it is linked to this action called when a project is created, which is actually the trigger itself. So that is, you can see that's the same name. So that's where it is linked to. So it will pick up the project UID from this box here. So whatever Orchestrator sensed that the new project is created, that project will be used all over this workflow via this UID if you use it correctly. Okay. So that's about this one, I think. So we explained to put together the workflows from these Lego pieces. One would need to be, one wouldn't need to be a hardcore developer. However, although we can provide you with documentation and example workflows and cheat sheets on how to configure things, Learning Orchestrator will still require some technical background, as you can see. The good news is the way you set up the Orchestrator workflows quickly becomes a repetitive task. And to be honest, for us working with it for a few months now, in spite of the difficulties in the very beginning, by now this became kind of the new normal. So you can expect something similar on your side. It requires technical knowledge, but it's something that quite easy to learn. So let's move on to the language adaptation workflow. This is it. Let me just zoom out so that we see the whole thing. Hope you can see, if not, just not me if I need to zoom in more. Okay, it looks it's okay. So let's read the story first. So what happens when a main language job is delivered by the linguist? You remember that's what happened. We have a couple of technical steps, right? We need to get some information about the project and we need to get some tokens and so on. But then it splits into two branches. The two branches are symmetrical. One branch is doing things with the German translations. The other branch is going for the French ones. And actually the rules here say that, oops, just move above and maybe just zoom in a little bit. Sorry, this way. So it says the target language needs to be German, Germany, right? And in the other case, it says the target language needs to be French, France. So that's what that's how it flows down. And if it's the German, Germany translation that was delivered, then the left side will be executed. If it's the French one, it's the right side. And if it happens to be something that is not included here, then it will not execute anything. Okay, so what do we have here? Let's just go for the German branch. Let me just try to zoom in a way that we can see. So we have three actions there. The first action is trying to get, well, it actually calls into TMS and asks the project to give me all those jobs that I need to pre-translate. Well, it's not the way it asks about it. It actually gets the jobs by filtering to the languages, the target language, and also the workflow level and so on. So that's what it's doing. And then it needs a technical step to filter out all that information that was received via this action, because it's not just the UIDs, it's a whole bunch of information, and filter out from that information whatever we really need. And that's happening here. And then the final action is going through the UIDs filtered out by this action, and one by one triggers the pre-translation of those jobs. You can see that there are two of these boxes look like cascaded sheets, right? So these cascaded sheets mean that they are loops. They are, well, or other word, iterations. So they actually go through certain items. In this case, if I just click on this one and go to the loop functionality, you can see that, well, it is handling the German translation, and it loops through the target language that could be the other locals, right? The adapted locals, the German, Austrian, and the Swiss market. And that's what it loops through. This is kind of like a static loop. It will always loop through these two items. There's another loop down here, though. And that one, as I mentioned, this one is responsible for doing the pre-translation for each jobs that need to be pre-translated for the sublocals. So in this case, the loop is going through some dynamic list that was received from a previous action, actually from the previous this action, that filtered down the information package to the UIDs of those jobs. So it is going through the dynamic list and picks them up one by one and starts the pre-translation for all of them. So that's what happens. And there's this little box here. I was just trying to avoid mentioning it too deeply, but it's an interesting one. It's called a JQ action. Well, actually, the origin name of it is transform JSON with JQ. JSON is the name of the data packages that we receive from each action. And JQ is a language similar to like XPath or regex, if you like, that can deal with JSON files. It can filter information out. It can pick up the right values, it can aggregate values, and so on. It can merge values, and all those kind of things are possible via this action. It's very powerful to work with the outputs and pre-digest the information before we are going to the next action. So the pre-digested information can be fed directly into the next action. So that's what it can do. Okay, so once you are done with your workflow, you develop it, what you want to run it. So just very quickly, I want to show these are the revisions here. We have this tab, and you can see revision 5 is published. So that means that my revision 5, whatever it is, it's a state of this workflow, is on the server running and waiting and monitoring and so on. So that's what is going on. And I'm actually editing revision 6. And if I made some fixes or changes to it, I can publish it. And then revision 5 gets unpublished and revision 6 gets published. Also, there's an important function here, feature here, the export revision of the file. So basically, you can get a JSON, well, it's a package, it's a JSON file basically that contains all the information about this orchestrator automation workflow, and that you can transfer, move, import to another one as a copy, and so on. So that's what happens. The other thing I want to show, once this workflow is triggered, there's a new item coming into the executions tab. And here in the executions tab, you can see some information about your workflow, what happened, and you can drill down. I just clicked on it. You can drill down to the individual actions and see their inputs and outputs like this. It helps a lot to troubleshoot things and yeah, fix things if needed. Right. I know this was a bit technical. I'm sorry about that. And I just hope I managed to avoid scaring you off with too much technical detail. Rest assured, our team will be here to help you with your challenges with Orchestrator. And with this, I would like to pass the word back to Clara.
Thank you, Miklós. I'll start sharing my screen now. Perfect, thank you. So let's say that our audience is currently amazed by what the Phrase Orchestrator can do, and they're wondering how they can get hold of it. So the Phrase Orchestrator is available as an add-on for our EU data center customers who are our Phrase Enterprise subscribers. And if you're wondering how you can get started easily, our solution architects are available to support you with your first steps with Phrase Orchestrator. They can help you build some custom-made templates and guide you through building your first workflow. So don't hesitate to reach out to your customer success manager and discuss the topic. Now, before we proceed to the Q&A, I would like to invite you to our upcoming webinar happening next week, again featuring Tobias and also our enterprise solution architect, Jakub Janičkovič. They will cover the topic of powerful localization insights right at your fingertips with our advanced analytics. So we will be happy to see you there. You can sign up at phrase.com/resources/webinars. So now, without further ado, let's have a look at the Q&A. Okay, first question. How long does it typically take to create a workflow? Whoever wants to address it.
Well, it depends, but it can take from a couple of minutes to whatever, a couple of hours maybe. Typically, even the most complex ones I built last week, actually one for a hackathon internally, that took me like 2 hours net to complete, and that was a pretty, well, a lot more complex than whatever I built before. So once you kind of learn how to make these less user-friendly notations, you can actually work with it quite quickly. And it all becomes very repetitive, as I mentioned.
Thank you. Toby, do you want to add anything?
I would second it. Yeah, I think it's never taking me hands-on time more than like maybe 3 hours for like very broad with a lot of cases. Like you saw, like Miklós's language adaptation use case. I had this one for probably like 7 or 8 different paths, right, for different locales ultimately, where the adaptation was happening, and that one took a little bit longer, but yeah, in the end it didn't take long.
Nice, thank you very much. Next question. Does every user on the platform have access to Orchestrator?
So this is, it's so Orchestrator is organization wide. So what you saw Miklós showcase, right? That environment is accessible to the entire organization if they're invited. So currently it's invite, right? And what we'll do is essentially get a list of users from you that should have access to this functionality. It doesn't have to be every single user in your organization. So you can limit it to, for instance, admins or a select group. But they will share that single environment. They can see each other's work. They can see each other's workflows.
Okay, thank you. Do you provide examples to new subscribers? What training options exist?
Yeah. Yes, the answer is kind of yes. As I mentioned, we already gathered some expertise using this platform, so we are happy to share it and utilize it to build your workflows and help building the first ones, definitely. Also, we have documentation on our help center. We have some use cases that we can show and export and provide to you. We are just working on a cheat sheet that we have already been using internally for our solutions architect team, and would like to make it available to the broader audience. And what else?
Yeah, I think that's it for now. So example workflows, right? We can export them and import them into your environment. Like Clara also mentioned, the solution architect team is there for you with, when you have questions as you're getting started and things like that. And then like Miklós added all the different options here that are being put together. There's documentation already, and we're just improving additional documentation, cheat sheets, and the like. I believe we will actually incorporate this also in our certification program. So expect to see it there. We're still rolling out some of the certifications, so that's currently happening. We're revamping some of them. So there'll be multiple different certification paths available.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next one, can you execute custom script within Orchestrator?
I wish we could. Hopefully it's pretty close to the top of the roadmap. So I don't want to commit. Obviously, I cannot commit to anything, but as far as I know, it is very close to the top of the roadmap. So we can expect it soon.
All right. Next question, can source review be added to the workflow?
Well, probably we would need to know more what source review means in this case, but actually we had a use case already where we implemented some kind of a source review using Orchestrator. So yeah, in general, the answer is possibly.
All right, thank you very much. As I don't see any more questions in here, I think we can wrap it up. So thank you very much, Miklós and Tobias, for the presentation and for the demo and for answering the audience's questions. And for the audience, thank you so much for taking the time today to learn about Phrase Orchestrator. As we close this session, there will be a short survey popping up, so you can leave your feedback and also suggest some topics for next webinars. If you're interested in something specific, let us know. Thank you very much. That's all for today, and I wish you a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Bye. Bye.